obviously, we have a very special guest today, all the way from Houston. We have Mike Haas, who is the executive director of Houston Oasis and the one who kind of started the entire movement, if we think about it. I was asking, how can I... Ooh, somebody caught it! All right. So I asked him how I needed to introduce him, and he said nothing special. So I guess there's nothing special to say about him. So, so if you wouldn't mind helping me bring up Mike Haas.
Hey everybody, it is so good to be here with you. Thanks for letting me be part of your first year anniversary, and everybody in Houston sends their love to you guys. And just awesome, and we're so thrilled for you and what you've accomplished together. I belong to a gym, and I know it doesn't look like it, but I do go to a gym. And, you know, when you go to the gym, there's this strange phenomenon of these people you see every day, but you don't really ever talk to them, you know, because everybody's on their machine, and they get plugged into the MP3 player, they do their routine. But in a strange way, you kind of feel like you know them, because you see them every day. And so sometimes in my boredom on the treadmill, I'll look around, I don't make up like stories for the people around me, you know, and kind of try to figure out what they do, and yeah, because like teachers kind of look like teachers, and engineers look like engineers, so yeah, you can come up with some good life stories, and but there's this one guy who comes in, you know, one of my imaginary friends there, and he just looks so angry all the time. He has like all these scary tattoos, and he's always wearing a ski cap, a black ski cap, and he's always scowling. And so my story for him is he's just kind of, I don't know, not a nice. I've never got a good vibe from him. Thought maybe he's like a bass player in a heavy metal band or something. I don't know. And or maybe he's just some kind of a jerk who's like hiding behind, you know, his insecurities, hiding behind his anger and his angry tattoos or whatever. So, you know, he just tries to project this badass persona. So the other day I get to the gym, and Mr. Badass bass player for the heavy metal band gets to the front door at the same time I do. And he gives me this warm, genuine smile. He says, "Good morning, how are you today?" And he holds the door and he says, "After you." And now I feel like a big jerk, because like the negative image I concocted of him was based on nothing, you know? He's like a really nice guy. And maybe there's a good reason he's scowling all the time, because the only time I ever see him is when he's working out, and everybody looks miserable when they're working out. So it was a little reminder to me that maybe I needed to work a little more intentionally on my empathy skills. And that's what I want to talk about today, is the role of empathy in our lives and what it can do in our community. Apparently I'm not the only person that needs to work on my empathy. Nicholas Kristof, the columnist for the New York Times, wrote a column recently about a friend of his, a high school friend of his. His name, Kevin Green was his name. And Kevin had fallen on hard times. He had hurt his back, he had lost his job, he had lost his medical insurance, and then he died tragically, prematurely at the age of 54. He had come down with cancer, and apparently it would have been an easily treatable form of cancer, but because of money issues and whatnot, he delayed going to the doctor, and by the time he went in, it was too late. And Nicholas Kristof wrote this column about his friend Kevin as kind of a plea for us to become a more empathetic society, have more empathy for people who are going through hard times. Well, then Nicholas Kristof wrote a follow-up column just a couple months later, where he talked about all the feedback he got on the first column. And the responses that people had sent into him were overwhelmingly negative and scolding. Kevin's problems were of his own making. What about personal accountability? You know, he's at fault for what happened in his life. He needed to take more responsibility, yada, yada, yada. And so Kristof's plea for empathy ended up generating a barrage of negative, shaming, scolding responses. Nicholas Kristof seems to be onto something. There appears to be a demonstrable deficit in empathy going on right now in our culture. A pretty well-publicized research from the University of Michigan, my alma mater, shows that there's been a steep decline in empathy levels among young people in this country starting in the 1980s, but the steepest decline has come in the past 10 years. And researchers are trying to figure this out. Some are speculating, well, it has to do with people spending more time alone, less time in community activities, spending more time in social media, which is great at spreading information and misinformation very, very fast. And social media is very good at firing up the lizard brain, but it's not so great at spreading empathy. And then there's this whole strain of thought that's been very influential in the Western world, stretching from Thomas Hobbes to Ayn Rand to Congressman Paul Ryan, that human nature is fundamentally driven by self-interest and greed and competition. But the thing is about the people who see human nature as driven by self-interest is that they are manifestly wrong. Because neurologists have discovered an empathy circuit that's actually hardwired into our brain. Evolutionary biologists are telling us that Homo sapiens is a social creature that evolved to be empathetic and cooperative. Child psychologists have observed the beginnings of empathetic behavior as in infants as early as 3 months old. So clearly, cooperation, empathy are just as much a part, if not more a part of human nature than self-interest and greed. It's a scientific fact. Now, before we go any further, I want to define empathy. And this one comes from an author who wrote a book entitled Empathy. I recommend this book. I would tell you the author's name. I seriously cannot pronounce it. So, it's a great book. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. How do I back up now? I write on a whiteboard at home. I don't do stuff like this. Okay. Ignore the stuff on the screen for the moment. Listen to the guy. Here's a definition of, the first definition of empathy. It's the art of stepping imaginatively into the shoes of another person, understanding their feelings and perspectives, and then using that understanding to guide your own actions. So stepping into the shoes of another, trying to imagine their perspective, and using that to guide your actions. And then I just want to put up a list of 4 qualities of empathy, and this was compiled by nursing researcher Teresa Wiseman, who's apparently studied a wide range of professions where empathy is relevant. So we'll just go through them very quickly. The ability to take the perspective of another person, staying out of judgment, which is hard because that's so much fun, recognizing emotion in others, and feeling with people. So you can see empathy is a very different thing from sympathy. Because sympathy can be kind of condescending. You know, or I feel sorry for you down in the muck of your problem. But empathy is getting into their shoes. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them what? Do unto you. That's the golden rule. To which George Bernard Shaw once said, do not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They might have different tastes. And he's right. So a golden rule based on empathy would be more like do unto others as they would have you do unto them. In fact, some people are starting to call this the platinum rule, and it's like way better than the golden rule. Platinum rule, yeah. So empathy is not the golden rule. And the other thing is empathy is also not love. It might include love, and it's a good idea to be empathetic to the people you love. But the reality is, we just can't love that many people. Our capacity for love, true love, is probably limited to parents, children, partners, good friends. That's about it in terms of who we can actually love. In the Christian tradition, you're probably taught stuff in church, like, or if you want to say the Judeo-Christian tradition, you're taught stuff in synagogue or church growing up, like love one another, or go around trying to love people the way Jesus loved people, allegedly. And that's an unrealistic goal. I own a Subaru. In fact, I bought 2 Subarus, and they're good cars. They're sturdy, they're safe, they're well-made, 4-wheel drive, awesome cars. I cannot stand their current advertising campaign on TV, which I'm sure you've seen, which goes, love is what makes a Subaru a Subaru. Now, what the heck is that supposed to mean? There's nobody down at the home office at Subaru that loves me. They might care about my safety as a customer. They're probably conscientiously designing safe cars, but love's got nothing to do with it. The slogan is blatant emotional manipulation, right? You know, we throw that word love around so much, it's like meaningless. I was at a shoe store the other day, it's like a national chain. I was waiting in line with my shoes, and the cashier says, instead of may I help the next customer, seriously, she said, may I help the next shoe lover? Never thought of myself as a shoe lover. It sounds kind of strange. So anyway, if I'm supposed to love everybody, love my neighbor as myself, which they taught me in church, there are a lot of unlovable jerks out there. I mean, some people think I'm an unlovable jerk. You know, it's an impossible goal. Nobody can live up to that standard of love one another or love your neighbor as yourself. But empathy, that's something different. That's doable. You can't love your enemies, but you can have empathy for your enemies. You can step into their shoes. You can try to understand life from their perspective. And that can make all the difference. And so, yeah, that's why I think empathy has a much greater potential for societal change, for change in our relationships than even the concept of love. The empathy revolution could be a game changer. And the really good news about empathy is researchers are telling us it's something we can work on. Our capacity for empathy is not limited by, you know, it's not a fixed quantity. It's something that can grow. We can develop our capacity for empathy throughout our lives. How? Well, actually, there's a whole bunch of ways you can look it up. There's like a dozen different ways they've found out you can increase your empathy, but I'm just going to list, I'm going to talk about 3. First one, join with others in a cooperative venture. Okay? There's apparently been a resurgence of group singing in the UK, and it's been driven by a reality show on the BBC, a really popular reality show called The Choir. And there's this charismatic young choir director named Gareth Malone who goes around the UK, and he puts together little choirs, and some of them are big choirs, made of disparate groups of people that might not normally meet each other. These choirs transcend socioeconomic levels, different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, and he brings these choirs together and coaches them to the point that they can put on a spectacular performance. And people who would not normally ever meet each other are creating new friendships. In one episode, he brought together a choir from people who work at the hospital, everybody from the CEO of the hospital, the heart surgeons, to orderlies and custodians. And he brings them all together. And in the process, they're breaking down barriers, they're breaking down misconceptions, and creating understanding. The show is a huge hit, and it's having a ripple effect in the UK. And it's not really about the singing, it's about building community, and it's about building empathy. Next, practice the art of conversation. Surveys show that couples in the UK and in the United States spend more time watching television than speaking to each other. And people in general these days are spending way more time sending short messages on social media than they are in substantive conversation with other people. Practicing the art of conversation is important for developing empathy because it's one of the main ways we can try to gain an understanding of another person's perspective, their inner emotional life. One University of Arizona study suggests that people with high levels of life satisfaction, people who rank high on the happiness scale, have twice as many substantive conversations as people that rank low on the happiness scale. I was out with a bunch of you guys last night at a place called, was it Buzzard Beach? That was, yeah. A lot of good substantive conversation there. I swam a little worse this morning, and they kept me up past my bedtime, but it was fun. But that's the power of what we can do. I mean, those are the moments you live for, right? Times like that where you I got to talk about Wes Anderson movies and everything in between. It was amazing. And, you know, one of the things is I heard last night in talking with you all is the same thing I've heard consistently from the community in Houston. That the thing that they have gotten out of this experience, I've heard so many people say, you know, I've made more friends in the last year than I have in like the last 10 years. And it is so amazing and gratifying and heartwarming to see these friendships emerge. A little later this year, we're going to have our first Houston Oasis wedding. People that met at Houston Oasis and are getting married. And all kinds of, I've talked to people, talked to a guy at lunch the other day, he said, you know, I have found friends here in the past year that I think are going to be friends for the rest of my life. So that's another thing that we can do for each other. Okay, finally. Literature, music, movies, art. Solid research is also showing that exposure to literature, music, film, and art can foster empathic behavior. Steven Pinker, the professor at Harvard, his latest book is The Better Angels of Our Nature, in which he charts the rise of empathy and the decline of violence over recent centuries. And his case is that the world has, for people has generally become a more peaceful, less cruel place. As recently as the 1700s, violence was a part of daily life which for us would be at an unimaginable level. I mean, they had public executions, they had, you know, the torture of animals was considered public entertainment. Torture was a regular part of an accepted part of the justice system. Of course, there was slavery. I mean, it was crazy. But then something happened. Well, all this stuff started to decline you know, fairly quickly, and Pinker suggests that at least part of it was the reading revolution of the 1800s. Starting in the 1800s, people were reading more than ever before, and they were being exposed to more empathic literature than ever before. Remember, that was back in the days when Americans would gather in crowds on the docks of New York, waiting for the next installments of the latest Charles Dickens novel. What happened to Little Nell? You know, it was like, you know, like before Better Call Saul. I mean, that's what they did. They were waiting for the ship to come with the next story. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, excuse me, the hoarseness is entirely your fault. Harriet Beecher Stowe lost a son in a cholera epidemic in 1848 in Cincinnati. And after her son's death, she wrote this: "It was at his dying bed and at his grave that I learned what a poor slave mother may feel when her child is torn away from her. The death of her son somehow caused her to start empathizing with the plight of slave parents whose families were being torn apart, and it prompted her to write Uncle Tom's Cabin, which went on to sell more than 4 million copies, which would be the equivalent of more than 40 million copies today, which is like, you know, more than 50 Shades of Grey, which says a lot about us. And when Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe at the White House for the first time in 1862, these were his words to her upon meeting her. So you are the little woman who wrote the book that started this great big war." And he was not exaggerating. Art, because it did, it turned people against slavery. Art has that power to elicit empathy out of us, like crazy. You know, and I think that's exactly why the United States government heavily censored the images that came out of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they prohibited showing pictures of flag-draped coffins. They prohibited publishing photographs that showed men, women, and children civilian deaths that were caused by American attacks. because the government knew very well that those images could stir up an empathic response that would weaken support for the war effort. They knew the power of art and stories to move people, and the American media and the American public largely stood by and let it happen. Finally, the empathy revolution, I think, has implications for the free thought movement. A few years ago, I attended a national convention of a well-known free thought group, and I enjoyed being there. It was fun to be around people who shared my newfound secular perspective. It was thrilling, but one part of the experience really bothered me. The convention was permeated with an unrelenting hostility towards religion. I would say hostility and ridicule of religion. At the evening get-togethers, people would dress up like priests and monks and nuns and demons and popes and everything else. It left a bad taste in my mouth because many of the people I know and love are still religious. I would not want to hurt them for the world, nor ridicule beliefs that they hold dear to their heart. Beliefs that I may disagree with and find to be wrong, but are still for them the expression of what they find to be good in the world. So they're doing the best they can with what they've got. Look, I'm as non-theistic as anybody out there, like all of you. I want to see us live in a secular society. You know, enough of the craziness like happening in Indiana and Arkansas and elsewhere. I've had it with that. But let me ask you this. If you want to win people to your side, you do it by ridiculing and mocking the other side. Of course not. If you think you can win people or win sympathy for the secular movement by mocking their religion, you're an idiot. Oops, there goes my empathy again. See, I got a lot of work to do. Because, let's say you're trying to sell Pepsi, you're not going to sell more Pepsi by ridiculing Coke drinkers, right? I mean, it doesn't whether you're selling soda to secularism, if you're trying to sell a product, the only way you do it is to make your product better, make your product more appealing than the other product. And I think that's the opportunity that lies before us here in the Oasis movement. The way we're going to make America into a more secular society is to make the secular alternative so compelling that people won't want to stay away. And that's the opportunity. That's what you're doing right here. You can offer better community. You can offer better conversation, better music, better reason, better thinking, and yes, even better empathy. Right here. And I think you're doing it. When the launch team that formed Houston Oasis chose the word Oasis to describe what we're doing, we went through a lot of terms. And we settled on Oasis because we liked what it represented. In a world that's often very unreasonable, an oasis of reason. In a world that's often very judgmental, an oasis of acceptance. And I think now we can add something else to the list. In a world that is often an empathic desert, can we not also strive to be known as an oasis of empathy? I think it would be worth a shot. Thank you for letting me be here with you today.
I think we have the opportunity to do some Q&A, so if anyone has any questions for Mike while he's here. Anyone? Oh.
Okay, just so everybody can hear the question. You talk about empathy and ridicule, and I make my money by writing funny songs that make fun of people.
That's different. That's
different. Seriously though, do you feel like there's a place for using humor to bring out inconsistencies and arguments that otherwise could get very passionate?
Yeah.
Is there a way to do that, approach that empathetically even?
Yeah.
Without it, because it feels like ridicule sometimes, and can you talk a little bit about maybe where that line is?
Well, yeah, I think it's definitely, humor can really diffuse a lot of difficult situations, can it? And it can bring people together. You get the, what is a little dopamine release when we laugh together, so that's really crucial. yeah, I think you're right. There's gentle humor and there's non-gentle humor. There's humor done in a good spirit. Humor is tricky though, because everybody has, like George Bernard Shaw said, different tastes. So, I'm not sure the line is always really obvious. And you always, and I've been doing public speaking for like decades. Every time I speak, I piss somebody off. It doesn't matter what I say. There's someone out there now mad about what I said. It's okay. I empathize with you. Okay, thank you. Rob.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to make kind of a comment. In light of what you're saying, one of the things that when people talk about Oasis, when they ask questions of me about it, a lot of people are fond of sort of painting us as an atheist community, which is largely true. But I prefer to think of what we do and what you do and anybody else involved in this kind of thing as more of a humanist thing. So the catchphrase that I am fond of is I prefer to be defined by what we are than by what we are not. That what we are is a sort of positive, welcoming, sort of humanist kind of community, and whereas atheism is just sort of an opinion about religion. I don't think that that's a very good description. I prefer to look at things in a more positive way.
Yeah.
That's why I like humanism as a description.
Well said. I kind of have this dream too that, because Helen made reference to, you guys are going to be around for decades. Hopefully we're all going to be around. This movement is going to grow and expand. And maybe someday the word Oasis will become the generic term for a Sunday secular gathering. Some people, because the early church didn't sit down to think of the word church. They nabbed the word ecclesia, which is the town assembly, out of the Greek language, which was a technical term in ancient Greek. And so we just took a word. I think we can transform that term and become so well known. People can say at the store, I'm going to Oasis on Sunday, and everybody knows what it is. It could be cool, like Kleenex or Xerox. It will be a generic term. Yeah. Right. JJ, did you have your hand up?
Is there a very strong list of go-to sources, literature, and other tools that you can use to really sharpen your sense and execution of empathy?
Yeah, well, I would recommend that book. That was just simply called Empathy. I think it's still on the hardback. It's relatively new, but that was a good place to start. I've been reading a lot of articles and like Scientific American Mind and Psychology Today and places like that. Those have been helpful to me as well. That's a good place to start. Brene Brown's work, I believe, is good. She's a very well-known social worker and best-selling author who lives in Houston, but she's written New York Times bestsellers. Brene Brown, her work related with it.
Okay, I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you for the questions, you guys. Thank you, Mike.